Hello students, believe this is up and running again. Of course, you know this is Dr. Winkler, and this is once again the Ancient Civilizations course. We are now on lecture 14, so we're moving right along. It's pretty close to midway of the course. I'm not quite sure of that. Nonetheless, we're kind of in a very important aspect of the course in which we're discussing Greek civilization, which, as I've mentioned earlier, is very strong influences Western civilization to a very great extent. Can we actually say this is a beginning of the Western civilization as we look at the Greeks? I'm going to look at a few other things right now. Get that on. I'm going to look at a few other things right now. Oh, how did that happen? I'm all the way back to the Phoenicians. Well, let's get past India. We're into Greece. Talking about Athens. Now, okay, the Greeks invent drama. If I ask you a question, very broad question, if we happen to be in a classroom, of course, what is our favorite art form in the modern world? Of course, people would mention music. We're big into music, are we not? I've read that radio stations are doing fairly well, largely music. When do people listen to radio stations? Going to and from work. So music is part of our lives. Music is a big industry. You sell an awful lot of records. These don't call them records anymore. You sell a lot of music in various forms, including CDs, compact discs, whatever. Now, if I ask you this question a couple of years ago, I think a couple of years ago, maybe a couple of decades ago, we would largely say hands down that our famous art form in the modern world is drama. While we do need to consider other art forms today, which I've already mentioned includes music, I'm not sure what you would say or how you would include surfing on your smartphone as an art form. But I'm sure you would connect to a lot of forms on your smartphones that happen to be art. Now, a few years ago, I'd say hands down it was drama. One of the reasons for this is that television took the world by storm. Even before we had television, we had motion pictures. We had sound motion pictures. We had the talkie motion pictures, which were extremely popular. Even during the depth of the Great Depression, when people had very little money, at least many people had very little money, sometimes even at great sacrifice, people would go to motion pictures and pay a few coins to get in because they needed the escape. They needed something different to take away from the challenges they had at home, the challenge they had with occupation, for example. So even in the Depression, motion pictures did well. But starting in the 1950s, television just overwhelmed everything. Almost everything else took a back seat to television. Motion pictures, you still have a motion picture industry, but it went downhill considerably. A lot of people followed sports, the local sports team. A lot of these dried up because nobody came to them anymore. Where's everybody at? Why aren't they going to the motion pictures? Why aren't they going to sporting events? Because everybody's at home watching television. And what's on television? Sporting events, news, but drama. Sitcoms, comedies, sometimes heavy drama. The vast majority of Americans own television, so well over 90%, like 98% or something, by the end of the 1950s. You simply have to have one. Everybody has to have them. And what's on television? Everybody watches them. The average person, I believe in my generation growing up, would watch television at least 4 to 6 hours a night, every night. It's a wildly popular form of entertainment. And you see dramas on those. The vast majority of Americans owning television. The vast majority of Americans watching multiple hours of television every night would see, on the average, more than one drama, sometimes multiple dramas per night. I mean, obviously, this is an art form which we enjoy very much. Even at the explosion of entertainment we get technologically, including computer games, I would still argue that drama, even today, is one of our most beloved and watched art forms. That's why I have a question mark up here, our favorite art form. Well, you certainly got to put it near the top, and I believe it still is. Nonetheless, what is drama, and where does it come from? We usually say the first great dramatist, the first great writer of dramas was Aeschylus. Notice we have pretty good indication as to when he lived. We're not sure exactly how many plays he wrote. Some scholars say, well, if we look at this, we probably have an indication that he might have written 70. Other scholars say, yeah, 70 is a good number, but we could consider a higher number, maybe even 90. That's a prolific writer. That's a lot of work. How do we know about plays when the plays are no longer extant? Sometimes we know about fragments, pieces of it. In Athens, when the dramas were presented, they were given to a person called the archon. And that person would read through these things. And he would say, which are the best ones for performance value? In some cases, the list of plays that were presented to the archon have actually existed. So I have reason to believe that as we'll talk about this as we talk about the other playwrights as well. We do believe that there was a very large number produced and very few of which survive. So we say maybe 7 of his plays in complete form have survived. Created drama. The Greeks are like many other civilizations. They like festivals. I talked to you earlier about worshiping your gods. And the God doesn't want to look down upon you and say, what a bunch of boring people. You want things that are fun. It's festival, dancing, singing, reciting. Now, these are not really religious in nature. However, festivals do survive in Greece and many other civilizations. As part of the festivals, you give presentations. A presentation might be a person. The Greeks liked choruses. I'm not saying you don't have a person standing out there and talking to the crowd. Let's take away that. Okay. And let's go back to, shall we say, a better representations of what these theaters looked like, because some of the ruins have still survived. In any event, the Greeks like to present in choruses. A chorus is a number of people that are reciting the same thing at the same time. I think there's artistic merit in that, no doubt about it. But on the other hand, if you have a large number of people that are saying the same thing, or shall we say loudly, or even shouting the same thing at the same time, the sound has a tendency to carry. If you're back in the cheap seats, way back here, and there are thousands of people, many hundreds very often, sometimes thousands of people, trying to hear what's being said, notice the human beings down here, not a large number of folk, not, well, as a few people here, but you get an idea of distance by the size of people going back here. You're back in the seats. You're going to have a hard time understanding this. So choruses work very well. And we see this in many of the plays where the chorus says this. Okay, now you make presentations. It can be a chorus, very often it is. Sometimes you can have a person. One of the ways by which we get information on folklore, that was talked about in ancient Greece was the very often that when you presented a presentation or a play, you're varying on a theme in folklore. And when you do that, you remind the crowd of what it is. This is a story about Hercules. This is a story about Medusa. And since we have, in some cases, the plays, we have the introductory material. So that helps us a great deal to understand the mentality of these ancient people. Now, if you have a person, remember they don't use women. They are women here, but they're played by boys. I guess it's considered immoral, or at least not culturally acceptable, to have women on the stage. So you have men, even playing women's roles. Any event, if you have a man here and he's presenting to the audience, that's not drama. If you have two men here, for example, and you have them presenting to the audience, telling a story, that's not drama. But if you have these two men turn to each other and interact with each other to present information to the audience, that's drama. See, it's the act of acting, if you will, that creates drama. We often give Aeschylus the credit for creating drama, not just a presentation. We're acting it out for the benefit of the audience. You start out with two actors. If you just have two actors out there, it can be a little bit challenging. But with two actors, you do have the ability now to present more information. We say that Aeschylus created drama. One of the aspects about Greeks, they like tragedies. And we say, as we read his presentations, we're talking about not only creating drama, but we're creating tragedy. We talked earlier, remember we were talking about Homer? Remember, he's playing into this idea. Remember when he meets the dead Ajax, a wonderful warrior, honored by many people. But in the netherworld, he's not doing too well. He's in an unpleasant place. So we see negative features here. Shall we say pessimistic features? Well, can we say tragedy is a aspect of shall we say a pessimistic view of life? Yeah, sure we can. As I've already mentioned, we're talking about Homer, actually talking about the Gilgamesh. We do have a tendency to like to hear about people of station, wealth, power, and kings, those kind of things. But what is the element of tragedy? We see higher class people represented in this art form quite a bit. Well, what is the element of tragedy? Why do bad things happen to people? Can we say it's the gods? The gods that play with us? That there's an act of the fates? You've heard about the fates in Greek ideology. That somehow the fates, and they kind of argue with each other, and the fates create our fate. They control us. So Aeschylus is very important. He's good to remember. Another is Sophocles. Notice there's overlap. What, they lived at least 40 years at the same time. Since Aeschylus comes earlier, there's a very good indication that Sophocles is going to represent some of the ideas of Aeschylus. He's not, well, he's original in some respects. By the time you get to Sophocles, we're no longer just dealing with two actors. We end up with three actors. Now you can imagine how much more complicated or how much more involved a plot could be under those circumstances. Of his 113, we have 7 survive. Now there are some people who say, well, we have, even though these are relatively small numbers compared to actually what was produced, they were the best. How do we know that? That's an interesting argument. The argument would be, well, we know that that's why they kept them, is they kept the best. Are we sure of that? A lot of these things, very unfortunately, in the ancient world, survived almost by accident. The water was spilled on other documents. The fire got these plays, didn't get the others. We can't be sure. I guess Elise's logical argument, if a lot of these survived almost by accident, then in reality we might not have the best. We might have the average. We might have the worst. The best ones could have been lost. Well, any event, once again, a small number. Sophocles liked to write, well, plays that follow up on each other. Perhaps his most famous is the Oedipus trilogy, where he starts out with the king. Remember, we want to talk about upper class people. The king Oedipus. And I've seen some of these performed. I've read a bunch of them. Usually when they're performed, this is not a really long play. This is not like a Shakespeare play where you have like five acts. And it goes on and on. It's brilliant all the way through. I'm not knocking that at all. But sometimes it takes hours, 3 hours, to watch the full length of a Shakespearean play. Very often when these are presented, that some of them are clipped and shortened just for the modern audience would enjoy it a little bit better. These are relatively short. And in doing so, it's hard to play out the entire length of the story. So he writes one, a follow-up, and then the final story. Oedipus is a king, and he has been fated. He's not in control of his life. He has been fated to marry his mother and kill his father. He doesn't want to do either. Isn't this really terribly challenging? How can you escape what's happening? He runs away, he flees. In the act of fleeing, he does get in connection with his mother. He doesn't know she's his mother. Nice looking lady. It's not uncommon. It's not common. It's not uncommon to have people marry women that are a lot older than they are. Trying to remember, the Prime Minister of France, the President of France, is married to a woman, what, is 20, 25 years older than he is. That's unusual. It's not unheard of. And as far as I know, at least what I've heard, they have a pretty good marriage. In any event, he meets his mother. She's a nice lady, right? A little older perhaps, but that's fine. And he marries her. Also in fleeing from his fate, Oedipus meets up with his father and kills him. Now remember, tragedy is obviously bad things happening to people. In his agony, when he finds this out, he tears his eyes out. And as you see this portrayed sometimes, you see obviously you want to see it in cheap seats. You see some kind of paint looking like blood or eye fluid or whatever that you can see for a lengthy area. Can I give you an example of that? It helps to start out the right letters. Okay. Yeah. One of the most famous in the third play of the trilogy is him lamenting his fate. I have seen this portrayed before, or should I say photographs. I've never seen the entire play performed. Any event, gouging out his eyes in agony for what he has done. Remember, in the modern world, we do have a tendency to look back on certain aspects of Greek civilization and relate them to modern times. One of the more famous doctors/psychiatrists in the early 20th century was Sigmund Freud. And Sigmund Freud, in my estimation, is actually a better philosopher than he was a psychiatrist, because he assumes a lot more, perhaps, than he should have about humanity. And we said there's something which we call the Oedipus complex. He says that's actually very common to a large number of people. The Oedipus complex is when you love your mother and hate your father. Euripides is, can I say, in my estimation, he takes the art form farther yet. Notice he's also an Athenian. Notice the time frame in which he's living. A lot's going on. He and Sophocles are alive together a lengthy period of time. And obviously, he's even overlapping with Aeschylus. So we are going Aeschylus, Sophocles, Euripides, as among our great writers of tragedy, the tragedians. Looking at the numbers, we believe he wrote about 75. I would call that relatively prolific. We are more fortunate in his case than we are in both Aeschylus and Sophocles, because we have about 18 of which have survived. Once again, he's writing tragedy. Oh, let's be fair to this guy. He writes a few love stories, which are actually kind of fun. You know, boy meets girl and a little Twitter-pated there. And sometimes, we don't usually say he invents the romantic comedy, but there's some small comedic elements in these romance stories. Can we say, however, he's most better known as a writer of tragedies? What is the element of tragedy? Remember, Aeschylus and Sophocles do have a tendency to say that there are forces, the fates or whatever, that are beyond our control, that lead us down to having bad things happen to us. Euripides, can we say, expands that to use the tragic element as being flawed character. There's something wrong with who we are. There's actually something wrong in our makeup. We make wrong decisions. Now, in modern drama, both in the legitimate theater and on TV or in the movies, we kind of forget, or we downplay the idea that somehow we are victimized by forces beyond our control. However, can we say flawed character? I make mistakes. Sometimes the flawed character aren't my mistakes or doing wrong things. Sometimes the flawed character are other people that are making mistakes, and I become victimized by that. But that's the kind of thing that we do have a tendency to see more frequently in modern drama. Rather than just staying at the high-class levels, sometimes Euripides tries to bring this a little bit closer to home. Shall I say closer to where most of us are in our social economic level, and that is the level of women and slaves. In Greek society, we're going to see that women are second-class citizens, if that. They're treated very badly. In some respects, they're almost viewed as a commodity. Of course, slaves are a commodity. These are the lowest level of society. In approaching this, can we say that Euripides is now trying to expand our understanding of our reality? You see, if we are victims of the fates, something beyond our control, it is beyond our control. Can we actually make better decisions? If we're controlled, as is the case of Oedipus, no, even if we're trying to make good decisions, it blows up in our face. If we look at flawed character, is he not inviting us? If you're examining people from the standpoint of flawed character, is he not inviting us to be better, to take a look at what's happening, and maybe we can make better decisions? I'm not a big literature professor, I'm a historian, but I have been told by literary people that sometimes your best literature is intriguing enough that we become involved in the story. We take a look at the story and we start thinking about alternatives. See, we've invited ourselves in. We're inside now. And now we look at this saying, well, let's think this through. Under these circumstances, maybe this character or these characters should and could or would have done something different. And in taking that approach, are we not inviting ourselves to be better human beings ourselves? Let's examine this. And in these scenarios, maybe you and I, hopefully, from these examples, would make better decisions. Invite yourself in and then see what you would do and have a better outcome from what's going on. My favorite play by Euripides, one of my favorite plays by anybody, is actually Trojan Women. It's Trojan Women. In this sense, Euripides is making a political statement. Look at the date when he's responding to an act by the government of Athens. The destruction of Melos. Remember, we're in the midst of the Peloponnesian War. This is not the beginning of the war, this is late in the war. You can imagine over time what war does to you, the war weariness, the bitterness. You can start out with high-minded ideas if you would like. But after time, bitterness sets in. Let's get it over with. We demonize our enemies. We want to build up what we are, but we are vicious. We could become more vicious to destroy our enemies, to justify what we've done before, and to punish people for what they have done. It's remarkable that Euripides was able to make a protest at this time. And the way he does it, whoa. I've already talked about this scenario. Let's get some Trojan Women up for you. These are representations when the play has been put on. This is kind of interesting to me because now we have kind of a modern interpretation. The stormtroopers coming in with his fully automatic weapon to intimidate the women. We've already talked about this scenarios. I know I'm repeating myself, but Melos, can I get Melos on the map here? Melos is one of the islands down here. It's just not that far away from Athens. And it's definitely within the scope of the Athenian Empire, the Delian League. The Meletians don't like being controlled by Athens. So they try to get involved in an alliance with Sparta. Well, the Athenians don't like that. So they take their fleet down and the army is on the ships. And they come in, they destroy the area. They plunder it. I mean, they're making a statement, aren't they? Anybody else messes with us, the same thing can happen to you. So the the Athenians plunder this. They burn the area. They enslave the survivors. Euripides writes a statement to protest that. In doing so, he goes back to an earlier form of the history of Greece. Remember, he talked about Homer and the Trojan Wars and the Iliad. And of course, Homer is not really concerned in his works about the victims of the Greek aggression, if you want to call it that, or retribution, against the Trojans. So you say Euripides isn't trying to be historically accurate, but he is taking the statement of the same kind of things happening. The Trojan women are this. They are the victims of Greek aggression in the Trojan Wars. All the men are killed. Remember, Euripides very often likes to talk about the condition of women. All the men are killed. The women are completely defenseless. There's nothing they can do to meet Greek aggression. All these women have to look forward to for the remainder of their lives is brutality, slavery, heavy work, sexual abuse, and death. That's all they've got. There's no other chance. Can we say, in criticizing what the Greeks did against Troy, Euripides is criticizing. There's no doubt about this at all. Criticizing what the Athenians did to the Milesians, to the people on Melos. It is gut-wrenching. There's no happy ending or happy scenario here. The women are lamenting the death of their husbands, the death of their family members, the death of their fathers. Ah, but there's a child. I can't remember if it says how old he was. Something like 8 years of age. Small child. The child is a descendant of the leaders, the kings of Troy. So the Greeks come over and say, the child has to die. What can that child do to you? He can grow up. Is he going to lead armies? He can't. His state doesn't exist. There's no way that he can have virtually any power and authority to threaten the Greeks again. But the Greeks come out and say, the child has to die. We're going to kill him. The women band together. They try to protect him. They try to push him off to the side. They try to stand between the Greek soldiers and the child. And the Greeks say, okay, you can have it any way you want it. We're going to kill that child one way or the other. If we take that child from you by force and we kill that child, we will not allow the body to be buried in hallowed ground or something like this. So the soul of the child will be lost for eternity. If you allow us to kill him, then we at least allowed him to be buried in hallowed ground. The women realize they're right. There's nothing they can do to protect the child. His mother is given a speech. Now, when the Greeks wrote, the Athenians in this case, when they wrote tragedies, they don't really set it off. I mean, a lot of times when you read modern drama, you'd have the dialogue which is presented, but there's usually a statement how the action takes place. You have the guy walk in, he says this. The lady walks over, throws a drink in his face and says this. Those kind of things are presented. Well, this isn't true in drama. So we have to read the action, shall we say, from what's being said. And the mother of this little boy saying, oh, don't hold on to me. Please don't make this harder on me. I can't protect you. You've got to die. It's like the small child is holding on to his mother as the Greeks come to kill him. They take the boy off stage. He's killed. They bring the corpse back on a shield, this little boy. And the women lament, oh, the Greeks, as the Greeks should fear a small child. What is Euripides saying? Athens, how dare you be afraid of a child? How dare you be afraid of Melos, something that can't hurt you? Whoa, that's a pretty vicious statement. The end of the play, the women are just going off into slavery. Now, I already mentioned Shakespeare just a minute ago. I'm a big fan of Shakespeare. I would say even though I first started reading Hamlet over 50 years ago, I know what it is about me and Hamlet. I don't know what it is. I never tried to memorize Hamlet, but I got enamored with listening to it on tape, on record players actually, and reading it. I listened to it over and over again to the point where I was actually, even though I wasn't trying to memorize it, I could actually recite a little bit of the dialogue. I still enjoy Hamlet. I don't enjoy everything by Shakespeare, but by darn, he's really good. With all my admiration for Hamlet and the other plays by Shakespeare, he's never done this to me. but Euripides has. Hits you in a very strong place. This is absolutely brilliant, in my estimation, by any standard. Now, it's interesting, however. The motion picture industry made a film called Trojan Women in 1971. Having read the play and then having seen the production, I think there's a little bit of a poetic license. They throw in other elements, and I think the elements are consistent with the kind of things Euripides was talking about, but not all of it is completely authentic. It's a very brilliant piece of work. I highly recommend it to you. One of the reasons why I like it is this is 1971. The greatest actresses alive and working at that time show up in this motion picture. I have to believe that they were so impressed with the quality of the film, the kinds of things they're talking about, that the greatest actresses at that time wanted to participate. And I'm really glad they did, because they're all dead now. It's been a long time ago, as you all know. If we were in the classroom, I can't ask you to raise your hands or make a comment, because obviously we're not together. But if we were in a classroom, I present a question to you. Look at the date and tell me why you think that motion picture was produced this time frame. Let me say something else about women. I do get a little tired going to films when the women actresses on screen are just eye candy. It's, nice looking women for the guys to say, wow, she looks pretty good. It's really nice to see a film where women are intelligent, women are resourceful, when women can make proper decisions. Digress, let's get back to my point. Look at the year 1971. Can any of you guess why it'd be more likely to see a film like Trojan Women being produced in 1971? The date's not really accidental. One of the ways we could look at this is remember the Vietnam War. We first sent combat troops to Vietnam, boots on the ground, in 1965. The last U.S. combat troops are removed from Vietnam in 1973. As the war progresses, there are more and more protests against the war. We have strikes of literally like 500 schools at one time. I believe it was 1971 when you have a major strike of high schools and universities, colleges, universities. There's a lot going on. Can we say making this film or releasing this film, whatever, in 1971 is a protest, a statement of protest against U.S. policy in Vietnam? Can we make that statement? I think that is very, very likely. But what did I just say? You can take a play that was written, over 2,400 years ago? 2,400 years ago. And bring it back. And it is so relevant as to be able to use as a criticism of modern political ideas. It's timeless. See the film if you get a chance. I think you'll enjoy it. I've never been in a place or position where I've actually seen this thing produced on the stage. If I'm ever in a place where it is produced, I hope I have the time and the effort and the money to go see it. I think I'd be very rewarded by that. Well, let's lighten up a little bit. We're talking about tragedy. We're talking about war. We're talking about the fates. Let's lighten up a little bit. Let's talk about Aristophanes. Look at his years. He's still within the Peloponnesian War, isn't he? If we picked out a few years, I'm not sure we could find a reasonable year, maybe where all these four men are alive and working at the same time. But if we look around here, we can probably find out there's a time when three of these men are alive and working. So we're seeing an explosion, shall we say, of this art form. at exactly the same time. He's not quite as prolific, though I would consider 42 would be a pretty good number of plays. And of these, we say that about 11 have survived. He's a comedian in the midst of war. He's a comedian when the times of degradation, destruction, and death. If you're reflecting the times in which you live, you do have a tendency to say, well, if it's negative and pessimistic, the kinds of plays you see are negative and pessimistic. On the other hand, can we make a statement that even in the darkest times, it's a pretty good idea to have a little comedy going on? Let's look at American history. Let's look at the Second World War, 1941, 1945. There's a lot of heavy drama there, the Nazi spies, and the genre of war films really doesn't develop till really, well, there's war films during the war, usually propaganda value. And after the war, the genre of war films, I think, actually takes a leap in quality in the late 40s and 50s. But we do see comedies as well. When I was a kid, I liked these. Bob Hope and Bing Crosby, the road pictures. Some of them made during the war. Talk about idiotic fluff. When I was a kid, I liked them. I would like to think that now that I'm older, a lot older, that I can talk about a little bit better level of sophistication. And watching them today is kind of hard to do. It's kind of, oh, this is so bad. But they're comedies. Now, during the war, radio was this before television. Radio was the medium where actually entertainment came into people's houses. I'm big into old-time radio. I love it. If I had more time to listen to it, I'd listen to it more often. There was a time I just dig out old copies and listened like 3 a day. One of the things I liked was Bob Hope. Bob Hope, I believe, was a brilliant comedian in this time frame. And Bob Hope had a comedy program. He would go out, and a lot of these were at military bases in the United States. Later on, he took his show to Europe and North Africa, and actually took his show over to the Pacific Islands as well. And he's telling jokes. I think the guy was a quality comic. I think he's got good material, and I think he had very good delivery. There's a lot of other comedies which I admire going at the same time. There's Duffy's Tavern, which I like very much. There's a bunch of others as well. So is that flying in the face of my argument where I say that hard times tend to bring out harder drama? Or is there another element involved where comedy becomes appreciated? Maybe that's one of the best ways we can look at Aristophanes writing, at least for part of his time during the Peloponnesian War. Well, his comedy, I think, is quite sophisticated. I guess the lowest form of comedy is slapstick, the pie in the face, trip the guy as he walks across the stage. Can we say higher forms of comedy involved mispronouncing words, placing people in awkward situations where people do foolish things? Higher levels of comedy. He actually, trying to remember, I read The Birds. Trying to remember what The Birds was talking about. The birds, you're up in the sky and flying around. And there's a little sexual innuendo there. He's a little sleazy, and sometimes when we get to Lysistrata, he's very sleazy. Anyway, he's sleazy. I think one of the comments I remember is that, oh, the couple of birds are up there and seeing the female birds. And the guy's looking over there and said, boy, I'd like to crack that egg and kiss what's underneath. A little innuendo there. The Frogs is harder to appreciate when you read it. A lot of drama performs well and doesn't read as well. Some drama reads well and doesn't perform well. But in The Frogs, we have the frogs go oompa, 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 as we're making statements. And it becomes some of the issue, some of the comedic element. And Aristophanes is actually one of our sources on Socrates, where Socrates is actually brought out a character. When he wrote this, Socrates is essentially alive and well. Our best sources on Socrates happened to be Plato, and another historian, Xenophon. Xenophon's stuff is good, but Plato is where we really see Socrates shine, and we'll come to that discussion presently. I remember when they bring out Socrates. Oh, Socrates, we're glad to see you. Give us words of wisdom. And he says, gobbledygook, blah, 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 blah. Well, that's very interesting, Socrates. Would you like to expound on that on your statement? He goes, blah, 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 making fun of the man. When I took theater appreciation course down at Snow College over 50 years ago, it's my first term at a college, first time out of high school, still 18 years old. And since I like theater, I started liking drama in high school, local productions. So this is pretty good stuff. And I want to be able to follow up on it. So I took a theater appreciation course. The way I appreciate theater is you go there and watch it. But it is helpful if you have an idea of more what you're seeing, shall we say a little bit more technical details. It's always helpful. One of our assignments was to go down to the listening lab, not seeing this performed. Go down into the listening lab and listen to Lysistrata. I was clueless. I don't know anything about Lysistrata. I don't know anything about Aristophanes. So you go down, I still remember doing it, down in the basement of the noise building at Snow College, old building. Down there they got a few headphones, you're sitting there. And after not too long a time, I'm starting to laugh because this is funny. What it is a satire on war. The basic assumption is men are stupid. Why are men stupid? They're fighting at war. They're going down and they're fighting this ridiculous Peloponnesian War. Why don't they just end it? Well, they're stupid. This is the guide kind of thing. So the women get together. Lysistrata is the main character. She gets together and start talking to the women and says, let's end this stupid war. The women say, how on earth are we going to do that? He says, just withhold ourselves. Withhold ourselves from affection from our boyfriends and our husbands. When they get tired of not getting what they want from us, maybe they're going to sit down and end up with a statement that they're going to end the war. Now, having said I listened to this, I do not recommend you listen to it. This is for adults only. Before you listen to this, I want you to get a note and permission from your mother. It's sleazy. But I think it's very funny. I consider myself to be a prude because sometimes earthy humor is lost on me. Well, at least I'm not a prude enough that I could not appreciate this. And there are insults to men's masculinity and men are stupid and all these kind of things. However, at the end, the women are successful. The women says, I can't take this anymore. I want to go see my wife and girlfriend. So they end the war. However, in making this kind of statement, can we see that what Aristophanes is doing? Is he saying that, oh, by the way, there's war weariness involved. We're sick of the war. Yeah, make fun of the length of the war. Make fun of the kind of negotiations going on. Let's get it over with. As we compare the great dramatists that have ever lived, we've got to put Shakespeare, if not at the height, extremely high up the list. Extremely good stuff. In German, we have Goethe. But usually comparing Goethe's dramas with Shakespeare's, usually Shakespeare kind of comes out ahead. However, if we compare the work of the greatest dramatists, we almost always have to include these. Some literary historians, literary critics, will say that what we're seeing here, individually and as a body work, is as skillful as anything Shakespeare did. If we can substantiate that, at least we're going to say these guys are among the best, at least comparable to Shakespeare. Do we realize what we're saying? Remember just a few minutes ago I said, look at this. Look at this. We have so many brilliant dramatists alive and working at the same time. Could you imagine what it'd be like if we have 2 or even 3 Shakespeares alive and working at the same time? Before I get off this topic entirely, let me say one thing. As I praise Greek civilization, I think it's very praiseworthy. I don't want to imply that what we're doing in the modern world is not artistically advanced, because I believe it is. There has never been a civilization, in my estimation, that has ever existed anywhere in the world that can compare with the modern world. Yeah, we don't have several Shakespeares running out at the same time, but some of the skill in our dramatists are very impressive. Motion pictures is a level of drama which these people could not even believe to approach. And some of the things, I'm not saying all the things on screen are good, but I look at some of these things and sometimes I'm blown away with the quality, the storytelling, the visuals we see in modern motion pictures. Not even talking about modern music. Yet we're not going to produce a Shakespeare nowadays, I don't think, because the level of drama which we're using is not exactly on the same level as Shakespeare. But I'm going to say that even if you had a Shakespeare, an Aeschylus, or an Euripides in the modern world, I'm not sure you'd be doing a lot better than the kinds of things we're seeing out there right now. So please do not despair where we're at. We're doing quite well. One of the greatest advances in ancient Greek civilization, of course, is drama. And I'm not going to talk about Pindar and the poets. There's a lot of other things going on in the written genre. But usually when we think on the height is art, is drama, and philosophy. Can we say, at least in the Western tradition, some of the greatest philosophers that have ever produced philosophy, have ever lived literally in the Western tradition, come from the Greeks. We can say that they actually started our ideas of philosophy. Even modern philosophers today can look back, and often do look back, at the kinds of things that were being produced by the ancient Greeks with a certain amount of admiration. And not only this, sometimes modern philosophy looks upon Greek philosophy as a point of departure to make further contributions. Now, I'm going to make a little statement about the intellectual tradition. I'm not trying to talk about all the theorists that lead up to our great philosophers. We really can't do this in a survey course. But let me talk about something that's in the background here. There's a group of people, intellectuals, which we call sophists, that are working in various places of Greece, including Athens, at about this time. Who are these guys? Well, they teach logic and ethics. Let's say you're in Athens, which is a democracy, and you want to be in a position to make a statement, to appeal to other people in the boule or any other assembly, the ecclesia or whatever. And you want to be able to do this in such a manner that it's impressive, that your ideas carry weight. So can we say logic? You want to use your words properly. You want to be logically correct. Ethics, of course, is teaching on the function of right and wrong. You're talking about ethics, you're talking about what kind of person should I be in a moral sense? And how do I get from wherever I'm at to that point of better morals, moral superiority, if you will. So they tend to teach logic and they tend to teach ethics. They are paid teachers. They make a living doing this. Now, let's take a look at Socrates. I've already mentioned that our main source on Socrates is Plato. I will explain that as we proceed. I'm not exactly sure why, but Plato said Socrates was not a sophist. I don't see in any of the dialogues of Plato which are using Socrates to a great extent. I don't really see him actually receiving pay for what he was doing. But he is getting fed. Hey, let's invite Socrates over for dinner. Let's get the local intellectuals together, and we're going to have some great conversations. In the meantime, Socrates is eating for free. Now that's not coin, but that's being paid. Is he teaching logic? Sure he is. Look at his logical arguments. Is he teaching in a manner to invite us in to make us better people? In other words, is he teaching ethics? Yes, he is. So why would Plato say that Socrates is not a sophist? Well, for whatever reason, he decided to say he's not a sophist. Though by definition, what I understand from sophistry and from Socrates, the overlap is quite significant. The sophists teach young people, and I'm sure you're familiar with this, you're young, that when you get to a certain age, it might be high school, it might be college, it might be the university setting you're sitting in right now. You're a little tired of hearing it the way it used to be. Oh yeah, same old thing. I've heard this over and over again. How about new ideas? And a little bit of a twist. How about a twist in such a manner that it makes the old school, the old stodgy teachers, look a little foolish? Is there not a tendency to be more popular? It's very common for people as you achieve a certain age. You want to get out, you want to, shall we say, do your own thing. You don't want to live in your parents' house anymore. You want to get out, you're tired of your parents. I do things differently. Let's go out and do our own thing. So someone who appeals to that, new ideas, are going to be popular among the youth. Socrates, through most of his life, is pretty old man, but with his new ideas, with his challenging old ideas. His ideas appeal to young people. That's one of the reasons why he's so well received, because the next generation, including Plato, want to pick up on his ideas. If we had a basic idea, and he talks about a lot of different things, if he had a basic idea, if we wanted to take his philosophy and take it down to its nub, we can say, know thyself. Or in modern English, you say, know yourself. Know more about yourself. Examine yourself. Reconsider your ideas. Reconsider your thought process. Reconsider your values. As I mentioned earlier in different contexts, you come forward and you say, oh, by the way, I'm used to this. Oh, this idea I was taught a long time ago. I've always done it that way. This way I was taught how to do. I'm comfortable with that. Let's stay with that. And Socrates would say, you're not making progress. Ask yourself the hard questions, even if the answers are a little disconcerting. Why do I believe the way I believe? What are my prejudices? What is my approach? Is it morally and intellectually consistent? Maybe if it isn't, maybe I should take it upon myself to change what I'm doing. You see how disconcerting that can be. I have to give up what else I've done. But look at this. If you don't know yourself, according to Socrates, you're not making progress. Ask yourself the hard questions, even if they are disconcerting, even if they do imply you need to do something different. He comes across in the early dialogues as a simple searcher for truth. Down to the next page, if I don't get this wrong and jump all over the place. Okay. In our understanding of Socrates, we really have to go to Plato. Because Socrates didn't write, or anything that he wrote has not survived. In one of the dialogues, which I'll talk about more in just a little bit, we talk about Plato has Socrates talking about himself in the Apology. And he said, for one thing, that Plato has Socrates saying, maybe Socrates actually did say this, but it is Plato writing this down, that he said, I tried to write poetry. I tried to do some writing, but I found out I wasn't good at it. His attempts at poetry have not survived. We really don't know anything about it except simple statements. According also to the Apology, Socrates said he went to the Muses. Now, there are women in central Greece, and they make a living at this. People come, they give them a coin, and they tell you about yourself. Because they're fairly successful in doing this, and we read about these women doing this for hundreds of years, that they're adept at probably several things, one of which is telling you what you want to hear. You can clue into that. And also saying things in such a nebulous manner that they can be taken more than one way. So Socrates goes to these women, and he gives them a coin. And they say, "Oh, Socrates, you are the wisest of all men." He says, "Wait a minute. I am just the humble seeker of truth. I'm the dummy. Everybody else understands." But perhaps by implication, this simple seeker of truth, I say searcher of truth, which I've written up here, this simple searcher of truth is wiser than everybody else because he realizes that you have to keep on searching for truth wherever you find it. Plato adored Socrates, his old mentor and friend. So as we have the dialogue written by Plato, there's not all, but almost all of his dialogues, I believe what, 22 have survived, all of his dialogues, he used Socrates as the main character. The scholars, the philosophers, have examined these, and they tend to put these dialogues in three categories: the early dialogues, the middle dialogues, and late dialogues. One of the ways they try to divide these up is how Plato represents Socrates. If he's the humble seeker of truth, the guy who just doesn't understand anything, that continually asks the questions, we do end up with calling these the early dialogues. I'll talk more about these in a few minutes. Euthyphro, Apology, and Crito are among them. Then we get to another statement called the middle dialogues. Socrates is still the main character. He's still the one that's doing a lot of the talking. But the ideas that are expressed, are they all Socrates, or is there now an infusion of information from Plato's ideas? So we say the middle dialogues, we tend to think, are a balance between Socrates' ideas and Plato's ideas. The late dialogues, where we include the laws, quite frankly, in the laws, Plato doesn't even have Socrates as a character. He disappears. Therefore, for everything that's actually being expressed in the laws, Plato is not giving any credit to Socrates at all. So we have to argue, therefore, in the late dialogues, we have Plato talking about Plato's ideas alone. Maybe I ought to come back and talk about the Academy a little bit more later. The Academy was the school which Plato created, and it exists for about 1,000 years. Let me talk more about that in a minute. Let's continue our discussion, however, on the dialogues. If you have a conversation, does that tend to be interesting? Now, I could have thrown this out as far as drama is concerned as well. It's quite relevant there. It's quite relevant here. As we read, sometimes dialogue is very interesting. Sometimes it's more exciting. Going back to my idea that if you have a dialogue and you're becoming inviting yourself in, you're thinking about this. Sometimes you can be a statement ahead of the dialogue, or sometimes you can insert yourself in and say, oh, by the way, this is something that's important as far as the discussion, and maybe we ought to take a closer look at it. Dialogues also tend to be entertaining. Those of you who read literature, those that you read novels. It's not like a flowing essay. One of the more interesting aspects are the dialogues. He said, looking longingly into her eyes. She turned her face up to him and said, why don't you get a shave? Whatever. But see, that's interest. Can they say the dialogues presenting this information rather than an essay as a dialogue creates greater interest? So this is an important form. We're actually going to see this show up later on. Now, unfortunately, Aristotle's dialogues do not survive, but we do have an indication they did write them. So this is a form of expression we're going to see in various places. Now, early dialogues. Let's look at Euthyphro. You're all familiar with the story of Socrates, that he was brought in front of the court, the boule, of Athens to defend himself. He was accused of two things: impiety, in other words, introducing new gods or not respecting the gods properly, and corrupting the youth. They're nervous about him. They don't like him. Maybe one of the best ways to understand them coming down on him is after a lengthy period of time, this lengthy Peloponnesian War. They finally cannot see anybody else out there doing anything that's different that might bother them. Well, Euthyphro, Socrates is brought to the court. Now he's got to wait his turn on the docket, what's going on before. So he waits his turn on the docket. And as he's waiting, there's another man shown up. The guy is Euthyphro. And Socrates greets him. Oh, my friend, my dear friend, Euthyphro, it's such a pleasure to see you. Tell me, why are you here? And the man says, I want to bring an accusation of manslaughter against another man. Remember, there are slaves in Athens. But some of them are, of course, if you're working the silver mines down at Larium, you're a chattel slave because you're going to go down there and you're going to die. But other slaves do have, shall we say, a small amount of rights. In other words, they cannot be arbitrarily killed. According to Euthyphro, there was a man who got upset with his slave. Oh, you rotten old slave. So he is so furious with this man. He tied him up and threw him out in the sun. Days without food, days without water, tied up so you can't even move. By the time this man got out, the slave had died. So here's an accusation. I'm bringing an accusation against that man for causing an untimely death. I think in our system we would call that murder, but we can call it manslaughter if we like. Sophocles, where did he come from? Socrates is very charmed by this man. Oh, by the way, you're here to make a very important accusation against a man. Therefore, you must understand the difference between right and wrong for you to be so sure of yourself to make this application, this accusation. And Socrates says, in a little while, I'm going to have to stand up in front of the boule, in front of this court, to defense of my life. And I want you to instruct me. I'm your student. Remember, the humble seeker of truth. I am your student. Teach me. So Socrates asks him, what's right and wrong? Euthyphro says, that which is pleasing to the gods is right. Okay. Socrates comes back and he says, very interesting argument. Which gods? Are the gods always consistent? Do the gods sometime do things that are immoral themselves? Being all powerful doesn't mean you're all good. Well, the dialogue picks up at this, where Euthyphro keeps on trying to find an explanation. There's something that works. And Socrates keeps coming back with, yeah, but how about this? Finally, poor Euthyphro kind of gets lost. He doesn't come back. He doesn't learn. Finally, he comes back and says what he said at the very beginning. That which is right is pleasing to the gods. And Socrates says, you're not helping me. You're just simply coming back to where we were at. Then Euthyphro gets nervous. Says, well, by the way, I got other things to do. So he refuses to make this accusation of manslaughter and leaves. And Socrates is sitting there saying, gee, that's too bad. I want this guy to teach me. You see, typical in the early dialogues, there's an issue that's addressed. And in reality, it's not resolved. Once again, inviting it in. If there's going to be a conclusion to the dialogue, you as the reader are going to have to think it through yourself and come up with your idea. This is very, very stimulating. Now, there's other issues involved, which we tend to see in Socrates. And that is, he asks you the embarrassing question. You ever run across people like this? You walk up to him and say, hey, good day, buddy. He says, what do you mean by good? It's nice. What do you mean by nice? It's a beautiful morning. What do you mean by beautiful? It's pleasing to the senses. How is it pleasing to the senses? I look at it and like it. Well, you see, if you're very good at this kind of discussion, you can get in fairly well. If you're like me and you're not good at it, I go, good is good. So once again, we can see that at times Socrates can be a little disconcerting. Well, there's kind of a sequence of dialogues here. The next one in the sequence would be actually when Socrates is making a presentation in front of the Boule. We call this the apology. This is the account of the trial. And essentially, the accusations brought against him. And he defends what he's doing. He says, do not attack me for being so knowledgeable and trying to subvert people. I'm just trying to expand knowledge. I'm just trying to become more knowledgeable myself and a better human being myself. One of the more interesting aspects of the apology is this, that Socrates actually gives a very strong defense on the nature of the intellect, why we're doing these things. Why should we do these things? What is the importance of doing these things? The Boule votes. Remember, there's like 500 men. There is a vote to find him guilty. It's fairly close. It's not like 500 to 1. It's fairly close, but the vote is against him. Now, the next vote has to be, what will be the punishment? And Socrates says, oh, may I be forced at public expense to go down to the agora. That's the marketplace where people tend to meet and discuss issues. Let me be forced to go down to the agora and at public expense go down there and talk to people. Now, you would think perhaps that would be somewhat comedic, but nobody laughs. They vote on this punishment now. Once again, the margin is not huge, but they do vote to kill him. Clearly they did not, or at least we believe, they did not really intend to kill him. I mean, would you stand around here to be killed? No, you run away, you leave, you go someplace else. That's probably what they wanted to do, is simply to leave. However, Socrates takes a different statement, which he talks about in the Crito. We do not have time to proceed. Let me see if I have any time left at all. Wow, I'm down to seconds. Well, let me continue the discussion of philosophy, of Greek philosophy next time. I will continue with the discussion and complete the discussion of Plato, and then I'll go on and talk about Aristotle. In the meantime, Enjoy yourself, and I'll talk to you again next time.